it's just wanting to be an artist is one thing, but becoming an artist is really different because it involves this sort of total devotion to the practice, and it becomes a way of life. And once you start really pushing through ideas and making something uniquely yours, then you go, oh, I'm an artist.
Teresa, thank you for having us.
Well, thank you.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
I come from Southern California originally, and I moved to San Francisco, and I lived there for a great number of years. And I moved here to Humboldt County in 1991, supposedly to take a one-year teaching position at HSU. And as a colleague of mine told me at the time, he said, be careful, the redwoods have a habit of growing on you, and here I am. The one-year gig turned into a 3-year, and then it became permanent, and I've stayed here ever since.
So you're primarily a painter.
Yes.
How did that come about?
I think I started making art, from the second I could talk. I just remember making stuff, and my mom, she would just have a lot of found material that she would leave out, like crayons and paper that I would cut up, and not a lot of paint, a little bit of watercolor.
Yeah.
And I just remember spending hours doing that kind of thing, and I just loved it. So I sort of became the class artist, and art was always my go-to thing. But I did almost no painting. I remember doing tempera painting as a child, and I remember in particular using the color magenta and just thinking, wow, this is just amazing. Physical sensation using that color. I really didn't know what to do with art, and I think I considered lots of different things because I didn't know anybody who was an artist, and I certainly didn't know anybody who was a woman artist. But then I went to college and I took my very first painting class, and that was at Santa Barbara City College, and I had a wonderful teacher named Bob Frame. And I tell you, it was just like I put that brush on the canvas and I said, I want to do this for the rest of my life. And I had no idea how I was going to accomplish that, how you made your money, how you made a living. Was that even possible? I didn't see any women doing it.
I noticed that, you do paintings, and you have like a very amazing, like interesting style of art that you do. It's like collages, or you like take pieces and you paint them and you kind of put them together. Can you briefly explain what that is?
Yeah, I think that the idea of collage it's kind of interesting to me because I always liked the idea of adding something that kind of disrupted the painting and that became a challenge, like how am I going to solve this? Kind of rearrange it and organize it in the best way I can so that I can retrieve things when I want them. So for instance, here I have a bunch of green pieces of paper, and then this is blue, red, purple, and yellow, orange, along with some neutrals and colorful bits and little teeny scraps that I'm using to make smaller pieces. Maps are another part of my process. I'm really obsessed with numbers, so I've come across a lot of vintage, flashcards that I cut up and use. I find numbers very fascinating and magical. I'm not a particularly mathematical person. I find they are symbolic of many things that kind of pertain to my current conceptual interests. I'm just really fascinated with this idea of structure and order as being a very rational and human activity. And then these are drawings that my late father did. These are mimeographs of electronic schematic drawings, which have been a huge source of inspiration for me over the I'd say past 20 years. He passed away 20 years ago, and he was a radio astronomer. And I'm just sort of fascinated by the language contained in some of his drawings that I don't understand, but I believe it's just another way of mapping or understanding the world.
You look at the painting as it is, but then the more you look at it, you find that deeper message and you find those deeper things. So when it comes to painting or just being an artist in general, what are some things that you often dislike?
The hardest thing about being an artist, the easiest thing is like being in the studio. And so I started this notebook where I just got a bunch of random collage things out of the garbage. I used tape, I used old catalogs. This is actually blue tape. I used all kinds of stuff. And I started doing at least one collage a day. And I tried to do these without any kind of judgment or preconception. I just did them, and I didn't try and make them better or worse. I just kept going. And this sort of opened up this freedom for me. And I think for a lot of artists and for a lot of people in general, the pandemic was an opportunity to get back in touch with what is really important to you. I mean, there was a period in my life when I first started working with plants and flowers and bodies of water where I was going through a lot of loss in my life. And so it became a way of connecting to the cycle of life. And more recently, flowers have been more a vehicle for my, what I would term, a popular term now is environmental anxiety. I'm always curious and interested in new ideas and ways of work.
What would you say your favorite thing, your overall favorite thing about painting is?
Color. And it goes back to being a little girl and picking up magenta paint and putting it down, and I almost have like a physical sensation when I see color and combinations of color. It just, sometimes it gets out of control, but people say a little too much color. But the world of the external, the artificial, the man-made maybe exists more vividly in our imaginations than the actual natural world. And I made probably 20 of these. I think intentions for an artist's work are really important in that it organizes your thought and it gives you a diving board into the work.
When you're creating these paintings, are there things you're inspired by, or is it coming from somewhere?
Yes. I'm really informed and married to narrative content. And that came from my early years as an art student, where I was really influenced by a lot of the work being made by like certain feminist artists who really wanted to tell their story. And that has continued through a lot of artists of color, for instance, are really interested in the idea of narration because they want to insert their story into the history of art, which has been so narrowly focused. So even though I've always worked abstractly, I'm always thinking about things. And this particular, or ideas, and this particular series, I call my greenhouse series. And in this body of work, I imagined what was probably the last greenhouse on Earth, where plants were placed to protect them, but in the course of being sheltered in this greenhouse, they mutated and evolved and changed into strange forms that are very removed from what they were originally. The fact of the matter is that plants are extremely resilient. They are disappearing, but they have amazing abilities to adapt. And I found that completely fascinating. There's actually a flower in China that scientists have found that has changed its color so it can be better camouflage from humans who try and hunt it for its medicinal properties. So, and then of course there's new information about how trees communicate with fungi under the ground, and that ecosystems like forests are actually communicating with one another. So these are all sorts of things that are informing me. So within this greenhouse that I'm depicting, I just find these strange, kind of mutant plant forms. A lot of people will say to me, oh, your work is very cheerful. And I think it is, but I think the cheerfulness also bears this certain sense of caution, and certainly, I suffer from the anxiety that a lot of us are about what the future holds in the light of a global climate challenge. But my working process is I never start with an idea, a concrete image or a plan. I prefer to work improvisationally, which is very challenging and sometimes maddening, but I prefer to work that way than to work with a plan, because part of my process is just a belief or a interest in finding things that I didn't expect. So what I do is I find random scraps of paper and I start placing it using blue tape on the canvas and moving things around until I achieve a interesting composition. What I'm always looking for is something that's unusual and that's surprising to me, but is solid visually. And I start with this sort of gray matrix of acrylic paint, and sometimes I'll add acrylic paint into a painting. Like here, these are patches of actual paint on board, but all of these pieces are pieces I've cut up from my own handmade paper, or a few pieces of found images like the blueprint and then the maps over here. I characterize myself, and my work up to this point has been largely a little more abstract, but I'm really ruled by abstract sensibilities. And I prefer that because it allows me to take license with space and form and color, and allows me to work in a much more subliminal, kind of poetic, intuitive way than a very structured or allegorical or symbolic way. Like this one here is the angry flower. I always think of it very angry. And this one here has developed scaffolding arms that kind of are supporting other strange life forms. I feel like artists' intentions are very interesting because I think artists have intentions for their work that may not necessarily be read the same way by other people, and that's what ensures art's continuity and its vitality, that art changes in terms of its meaning according to who's viewing it, what age they're viewing it, what culture's viewing it. So I think as artists we have to relinquish that sense of control and be prepared that people will engage with your work in many, many different levels, and that's quite fine, that's quite okay. If you want to have a message, then you need a different, I think, vehicle. Maybe advertising has a very strong message, for instance. So,
what would you say one of your greatest accomplishments are in art?
There's always someone smarter, richer, better looking, you know, more talented, more successful, whatever, than you are at any point. And then there's always people who are less. So I think the important thing, I don't really focus so much on these high points because in a way, they're not the day-to-day reality. They kind of happen and they're really exciting, like getting in a magazine or, you know, having a great show or whatever, making sales. They happen and they're kind of interruptions and you get excited about them and then they're gone. And so you become sort of Pavlovian, like, where's the next one? I want the next one. But it has really nothing to do with true success or accomplishment. I think I feel so accomplished because here I am at my age and I'm still making art. That's my greatest accomplishment, is that I'm still working. And then I'm not only just working, that I feel like I'm still growing and I'm still excited about what I'm doing in the studio and I'm still innovating. So
thank you, Teresa, for having us here at your amazing home.
Thank you, Rhynell. I enjoyed the conversation.
And thank you for joining us on Studio Space.